Just
All good.
good.
So
Good.
this is a relatively simple presentation, but it's allowed me to ask questions of Mesolithic due to the IT issues here. If there are any questions afterwards, if they could be sent via email to Elizabeth, that will be helpful, and I will reply to them when I'm back into the UK. So this talk is about Southwest Wales, and I've opening this talk, hopefully, Elizabeth, with an image of Dougal High at Llangwin, Pembrokeshire, the site of over 1,000 Mesolithic surface finds starting some 10,000 years ago. And this location is discussed later in the presentation. I'm going to confine, notwithstanding the title, to the Mesolithic because it's just too much otherwise. Central to this talk is my explanation why Mesolithic groups can be evidenced from the estuarine and riverside surface finds. And if so, why was the Dougal High estuary so important? I'll start by showing you a simple image from HEMED's HER database of the recorded Mesolithic find spots. That's in figure 2, Elizabeth. It's evident most of Pembrokeshire's recorded Mesolithic finds are on the contemporary coastal fringe, particularly the southwest coast, constrained by the Milford Haven waterway, some 8 kilometres to the north. This intensity of activity is clear from Ken Murphy's 1996-97 coastal survey, and it's a reflection of the complex geology of Pembrokeshire, the harder igneous stone strata being in the north, and the limestone and the older red sandstone in the south. Perhaps understated by the HER image, which has just been shown, this coastal area is one of Pembrokeshire's highest concentrations of Mesolithic activity. Many surface lithic finds were identified by field walking in the early 20th century by Leach and Cantrell, and Leach's 1913 archaeological conferences image, which is shown hopefully in figure 3, illustrates the approximate location of flakes, chipping floors, shell mounds, and indeed later Neolithic pottery shards from Linney Burrows close to Castle Martin as far as Leach was concerned. I'm also showing in figure 4 a late Mesolithic narrow-shaped microlith recovered from Castle Martin Burrows, again on the southwest coast, and it's likely to date between 7,000 and 5,000 calendar BC. It's of course enlarged, and due apologies for the eyelash on my photo image. Much of the earlier Mesolithic material has presumed to have been lost in the drowned coastal landscape beyond the existing shoreline as a result of sea levels rises due to glacial-Eustace change in the release of water from melting ice sheets. Garrow and Sturt provides a detailed assessment of sea level rises in the 2017 Stepping Stones results, but a sea level rise perhaps of 30 metres can be envisaged in the aftermath of the last ice age, continuing during most of the Mesolithic period. It's certainly worth reflecting on a likely former vibrant and semi-open woodland landscape now flooded beneath the sea surface, where a subsistence lifestyle of transient early Mesolithic groups was dependent on marine such as mackerel, herring, cod, and shellfish, evident, for instance, in the Gold Cliff fish bones identified by Bell in 2001. Terrestrial hunting resources too were key, such as auroch, pig, red deer, and evidence of the latter from the antlers retrieved at low tide from a flooded seabed landscape at Borth is shown here in figure 5. A sense of this lost landscape is also evident from the tree roots briefly emerging at an exceptionally low tide, again at Borth Beach, which I visited in 2023 when I took this photograph shown in figure 6. So in this presentation, I'll be suggesting Milford Haven's Dougal High was the principal conduit for Mesolithic inland movement in Pembrokeshire, and I hope to explain why a partial migration took place and the role of this principal waterway as a potential axis of movement turned by Bell in 2020. But firstly, I'll mention the evidence of some of the Pembrokeshire's estuary edge Mesolithic places of activity. Excavations by crane at South Hook during 2004-2005 on the site of the former Esso refinery is located on the northern estuarine shoreline, 3 kilometres east of the estuary mouth. Excavations revealed a lithic scatter of 336 artefacts, being mostly Mesolithic, including later flint blade cores, denticulated flint scrapers, and microliths assessed by Dr. Elizabeth Walker. Beneath Pembrokeshire Castle's Great Hall, a further 6 kilometres to the east, Mesolithic activity at Wogan's Cavern is at Pembroke River level, flowing into the Dougal High estuary. Seasonal excavations continue, and the upper layers have already revealed a narrow-shaped microlith shown in figure 7, which was an obliquely blunted point. Also on the northern Dougal High foreshore, Mesolithic activity at Burton is evident at the estuary as the estuary turns northwards. Here, near the western estuary bank, an early Mesolithic rhyolite truncheon axe was identified from a surface find near Benton Castle and is within 100 metres of the Dougal High shown here in figure 8. The Mesolithic truncheon axe shows the characteristic oblique removal of the flake at the top left-hand side of the artefact to resharpen the axe, probably used for tree clearance or providing wood for a campfire. Perhaps the Mesolithic highlight here is Langwin, 2 kilometres north of Benton Castle, also overlooking the Dougal High. More recently, a fishing village, and from Langwin Pill, a small tributary, gridded field walking by David and Painter in 2014, identified over 1,700 chipped flint and stone artefacts. Surprisingly, these are not wholly later Mesolithic flakes and fragments from circa 7000 BC, but include 22 early microliths producing identified obliquely backed pieces, scalene triangles, and rod-like pierces or mèche de forêt. Similar artefacts to these were identified at the Nab Head on Pembrokeshire's southwest coast, which were radiocarbon dated to an early Mesolithic 8625-8285 by Hedges. The Dougal High estuary bifurcates at Picton Point to form the western and eastern clevi. At Picton Point, a similar truncheon axe to the Benton find was identified, which might again be early Mesolithic. So in this map shown in figure 9, I've shown the location of Burton, which is at the bottom here is 1, and then we've got Benton, Benton Castle, Langwin, and finally 4 at Picton Point, where the estuary separates to the western and eastern clevi. Later Mesolithic and early Neolithic finds were also identified close to the riverbank on the eastern clevi at Canaston Bridge by Duncan Schlee in 2009, shown here in figure 10. And that was as a result of excavations ahead of the A40 Robertson-Wathen bypass. The lithic assessment by Dr. Elizabeth Walker included later Mesolithic narrow-blade microliths, the site likely to be a core processing area as part of napping activities. Finished tools including a later Mesolithic truncated blade, together with a Neolithic pointed awl and a knife. There are also mostly later Mesolithic surface finds at sites close to Western Clevi's riverbanks, approaching and beyond Haverfordwest as the river narrows. Early Mesolithic activity cannot be ruled out, though most material is later. There's also a Neolithic leaf-shaped arrowhead at St. Catherine's Bridge, where over 4,000 surface finds were found. Nearby, also at Cutty Bridge, again adjacent to Western Clevi, David and Painter identified over 7,000 flint and stone pieces, mostly from a 1.75 hectare field. There's perhaps a sense of the earlier Mesolithic activity being mostly in the lower Dougal High reaches, though there's also occasional earlier material identified from the Western Clevi riverbanks further north, especially Upper Caulfield, close to St Catherine's Bridge, beyond Haverfordwest, which accords with both several earlier and later Mesolithic finds in northwest Pembrokeshire. So why did earlier and later Mesolithic groups choose movement to inland Pembrokeshire? And why was the Dougal High crucial? I want to show you a diagram of Cardigan Bay in Cardiff and the impact of rising sea levels from glacial meltwater. In this diagram of figure 11, the Martin Bates survey of Cardigan Bay, which is of course 60 kilometres or so northeast of Pembrokeshire, the likely effect of rising sea levels is shown resulting from glacial meltwater. The suggested flooded Mesolithic landscape is shown coloured pink, a landscape which is likely to extend it possibly at least a further 10 kilometres into the now Irish Sea from the present shoreline. That landscape has now vanished. The earlier Mesolithic likely to have retreated to the extent terrain. It is likely at least some of the effects of those rising sea levels would have impacted Pembrokeshire's south coast, possibly halving the distance from the seashore to Milford Haven's southern estuary bank to its current circa 8 kilometres. The need for a constant reorientation by the earlier Mesolithic is therefore very likely as new landscapes were negotiated. Though the influence of Mesolithic groups on the landscape may have been minor, browsing animals may also have created small clearances in this reduced area. Mesolithic groups feeding on wild plant, berries, and the result of hunting. Opportunities for a marine fish diet also persisted, but was all this enough, given the constriction from the location of the sound? Some Mesolithic, I contend, thought not. Riverine connections as part of Bell's axis of connectivity and movement beyond Milford Haven inland offered an opportunity for freshwater fishing and increased potential for further hunting and wild plant foraging. There's a welter of evidence in England to support the importance of river valleys from the recorded riverine Mesolithic finds. Connellan notes the early Mesolithic followed the rivers from the evidence of surface finds in the Colne Valley, the Eton rowing course of the Thames, and also following the route of the River Kennet, particularly at the Thatcham sites, and of course the Severn Valley. But that brings us back to Pembrokeshire and one of the reasons why river movements became a crucial aspect of Mesolithic mobility. Mesolithic people have been described by Mithen as being part of the natural world, deriving resources from hunting practices and wild plants. But there's a problem. Paul Davis, in his 2005 paper, suggests there were many potential threats and challenges when moving through Holocene landscapes, not least a chance encounter with a wild boar, wolf, or as Lily suggests, in the inherent difficulties in finding one's way through an unfamiliar woodland, or perhaps encountering another group chasing the same ungulates. I've previously said the extent of Pembrokeshire's landscape between the south coast and Milford Haven Sound reduced substantially or became squeezed from the effects of rising sea levels, resulting from glacial melting in the Mesolithic period. Mesolithic groups, I contend, crossed the Dougal High estuary, now currently 1,800 metres in width, by rudimentary boats and also paddled eastwards, following the route river turning north. The Bronze Age Dover boat and the Ferriby plank boats are, of course, well known. Despite no conclusive evidence of earlier Pembrokeshire craft, the possibility of Mesolithic craft is compelling, given the later Mesolithic Dutch logboat at Hardenveld de Bruin, radiocarbon dated to 5,400 Kanda BC by Louis Kujemans, which is shown in figure 12, and an even earlier dugout identified at Pesse, also in the Netherlands, is dated to an early Mesolithic 8010 to 7510 calendar BC by Manetti. So ideas travelled, especially when at this time Britain was still connected to Northern Europe. But perhaps the undated logboat recovered from the Langors Lake in the Banne Brush and God or Brecon Beacons is a local craft that could have been part of the Dougal High tradition, shown in figure was either 13 or 12B Elizabeth. In concluding this talk, I've suggested the landscape south of Milford Haven Sound may have been under environmental stress as being as a result of rising post-glacial sea levels, reducing the extent of terrain, and with it, the reduction in available resources, perhaps inducing some Mesolithic to leave. The association of the Mesolithic with riverine routes has been emphasised. Pembrokeshire's Dougal High estuary leading into Clevi was also used as a safer routeway, avoiding often thick woodland, providing hunting opportunities close to the river's edge, whilst the river valley would have afforded a clearer vision and safer environment, warning of large animals and competing Mesolithic groups. The availability of freshwater fishing too is likely to have been a sighting criteria, particularly at Llangwm. But as Tim Painter suggests, other foodstuffs would have been utilised, such as wild fowl, otters, and water plants. Whilst the majority of the identified Mesolithic lithics, therefore, in inland Pembrokeshire from riverine sites, appears to be later material between 6,000 and 5,000 calendar BC, remains a surprise to me there was clearly an early Mesolithic presence in land. People that may have already known of the reducing coastal landscape, perhaps from retold repository of group memories around campfires. Beyond contention, in my view, is the means, the likelihood of hollowed out logboats to cross the waterways and gradually navigate upriver being key. So I'd like to thank you, and especially for my supervisor, a long-suffering Dr. Leslie McFadden. Thank you.